Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Draft League Retrospective. We had the little fun trailer earlier, but decided that I've still got it in me to properly go through a game today. So we've got today this game between TBIC106, who we've seen before, and rageman707, Vin. And the reason that I've chosen this game to go through today is just that I think that there's quite a lot on show in terms of just some kind of fundamentals of singles Pokemon, really. And it's important to bear in mind through this that for both players, it's their first draft, they're reasonably new to the game, and just the way that you get better is by making these kinds of mistakes. So like the previous ones that I've done in this kind of fashion, it's very much not to shit on either of them, but more just for a kind of perspective of learning from the beginner mistakes that everyone who eventually gets good makes. So to go over the teams quickly, we've got a rain team coming out from Vin. And so the Pelipper sets up the rain, and then Mega Swampert in the rain with its Swift Swim is terrifying, and Zapdos is also going to be able to spam perfectly accurate Hurricanes as well as Thunders. As a side note, I love Zapdos Rain. It's one of my favourite archetypes to use. And then alongside that, he's got a Swords Dance Mimikyu, Glastrier with Body Press, Icicle Crash, Stomping Tantrum, and I can't remember the other move because it's been a while. And interestingly, a Z Celebrate Meloetta, which for anyone not aware, uses your Z move to raise all of your stats by 1. Then on TBIC's side, we've actually also got some rain in a Goodra that can set the rain and then use Rest, which with its ability of hydration is going to cure the sleep at the end of the turn, letting you just get all your health back effectively for free. The Tornadus is able to Hurricane in the rain. He's got a Dual Screens Uxie, usual Mega Camerupt, a slightly odd Skarmory that we'll get into when we see it, and a special attacking Boltund. So in terms of threats on each team, the Mega Swampert is looking incredible with the rain up. It's just threatening and smacking about everybody, and the Uxie and the Skarmory that aren't going to take as much damage from it can't really do very much to it back. The only way Skarmory can really harm a Swampert is with counter, which I don't believe this one is running. And so for Vin, the plan wants to be get your rain up, get the Swampert in, and just make opportunities for that thing to wreak havoc. And that's going to be very effective at breaking everything to the point that the Meloetta can come in, Z Celebrate, and sweep. Whereas on TBIC's side, the Boltund's looking as good as a Boltund will ever look if he's able to deal with that Swampert. The Tornadus is hitting everyone other than the Zapdos very well. The Mega Camerupt isn't great in that it's quad weak to water against a water team. The Goodra is looking pretty good, can be quite hard to break with a lot of Vin's team being special attackers, although it is scared out by the Mimikyu and the Glastrier. But Skarmory plus Goodra makes a pretty strong defensive core. And so TBIC will be looking to just outlast and weather the rain, so to speak, but get the screens up with the Uxie and make progress with the Tornadus and Boltund. So with that, we're going to get into it. With leads, we see the Uxie lead met with a Pelipper, and it's a fairly standard lead from both teams. Rain often likes to lead with Pelipper just so that you can get the rain up, you turn out, get into one of your rain mons, and just start clicking rain boosted attacks. whereas Uxie often likes to lead because it can set stealth rocks, it can set up dual screens, it can U-turn out for momentum. Standard stuff. We see the light screen come out from TBIC, and then a U-turn out into the Mimikyu, which is immediately going to be threatening to Uxie, especially considering that it set the light screen instead of a reflect. But we see the Mimikyu go for a shadow sneak, and it's kind of a strange shadow sneak because as a Mimikyu, you're outspeeding an Uxie anyway, so the Shadow Claw is really free unless you don't have it, in which case the play rough is still stronger than a super effective Shadow Sneak, or you could Swords Dance or do something else. But as is, Vin goes for the Shadow Sneak, and we see the U-turn from the Uxie, and the disguise of the Mimikyu is broken, which is a really bad trade, because that's 36% on the Uxie, which is just kind of whatever. And in return for that, you've lost your disguise on the Mimikyu. And the thing with losing that disguise is that it makes TBIC's offensive threats a lot harder to offensively check, in that suppose he gets Tornadus in the rain and just starts hurricaning everybody, you can't go Mimikyu, live a hit with your disguise, and threaten it back anymore. And the same with that Bolton. You can't just come in and freely live a hit anymore. And generally, if you've got a Mimikyu, you want to be very careful about preserving its disguise, and then when you lose your disguise, losing it for good reason. But that doesn't really happen here. TBIC's able to get in the Skarmory, which the Mimikyu can't touch, and we see the hard Zapdos, which is a good switch because just a Skarmory cannot do anything to a Zapdos ever, and you're threatening it out even with the light screen up. So the Uxie comes back in on the Thunder, doesn't take very much with the screen, and then Vin's going to just Hurricane it down. And it's only a little thing choosing between Thunder and Hurricane, but Hurricane is better there from Vin, which is because you've already paralyzed it, you might as well see if you can confuse it as well. And if TBIC makes any switches to, say, Goodra or Camerupt, which will be terrible, but more Goodra than Camerupt, then you're also hitting it a bit harder. But the Uxie is just going to get up a Reflect and then die. And so now TBIC, his screens are gone, and so he needs to make the most of those screens and make it so that sacking the Uxie is worthwhile as he goes 5-6 down. And now the Goodra's going to come in, which a Zapdos can't really touch at the best of times. Goodra has monstrous special defense, even more so while this light screen remains up. And Vin's going to go into his Mimikyu and die to an Aqua Tail. And at that point, it does seem a little strange going into the Mimikyu and dying, but I think it makes sense because Goodra has a really wide move pool. It can be a physical or special attacker. There's not really a safe switch into it, in that when TBIC is expecting you to bring rain, he could be something like Thunder, which would threaten stuff like Pelipper. It can get Ice Beam. It can just do a strong Draco Meteor on anybody. There's not really safe switch-ins to it until you find out a bit more about what moves it's carrying. And so sacking the Mimikyu with its disguise broken that isn't really going to be doing anything, especially against a Skarmory, makes sense there. And then the Glastrier is going to come in and just goes for a Protect. And I think the reason for that Protect is to try and stall out the rain turn. But there just isn't really... No, sorry, not the rain. The screens turns. You want the rain. You don't want his screens. But I don't think it really makes sense just because Skarmory behind a Reflect is the absolute freest switch ever on the Glastrier. And now we see again, Zapdos can come in hard on the Skarmory as much as it likes. It reveals the Night Slash, which is pretty strange. TBIC said afterwards that the reason he bought that was for the Xatu that Vin could have bought but decided not to, which is a fun idea and the kind of weird prep that you can see only really in the draft format, because Xatu loves to come in on Skarmory because it magic bounces back the hazards that the Skarmory would set. But the Zapdos gets in, and Vin's then going to double into the Pelipper as TBIC brings in the Tornadus. And the Tornadus there is ballsy in that to just run it back, they both switch, and TBIC was bringing his Tornadus in on a Zapdos. But in this case, it ends up working out. TBIC potentially seeing that for Vin, there's not really any point staying in on something that you can't touch when TBIC could very easily just bring in the Goodra or anything else on the Zapdos. But the Pelipper is going to just stay in and get hurricaned to death by the Tornadus. And this is terrible because the Zapdos can come in, not comfortably per se, but it can roost off the damage. But moreover, when you're running Rain, you have to be so careful with your Rain setter. You can't sack it until you know that you're not going to need to set it again. Because now, the Pelipper is dead, and so all Vin has of Rain left is the turns that it just set. Once those turns are gone, he can never set up any more Rain. And for 2 of those turns, a Reflect is up, which is going to really severely limit the amount of progress that the Swampert is able to force. And so the Zapdos is going to come in, and it's going to just thunder into the Goodra. Gets the paralysis, but Goodra's going to hydration it off. And that's a great turn for TBIC, just because there goes another turn of Vin's Rain that he can't set up anymore. And he's got basically nothing out of it. Thundering into the Goodra. So he's going to bring in the Glastrier, and he's going to have to take a big Draco Meteor to do that. But again, TBIC can just go Skarmory now, and that's more turns of Rain disappearing without any real progress that Vin can make. The Skarmory shows that it's actually Z Black Hole Eclipse to try and hit the Glastrier. Or to hit the Xatu originally, now hitting the Glastrier. But TBIC drops it there, gets some damage off, and for Vin, staying in here, I really don't agree with. Because we've seen before, the Zapdos comes in every time, and that can roost off any damage you might take, whereas this Glastrier, it's not recovering HP, and all of this chip that the Skarmory is getting is gonna just add up without anything that Vin can really do about it, meaning that in the future it can't come in on and threaten the Goodra anymore. So we're gonna see more turns of the Glastrier just staying in and ineffectually trying to do anything to the Skarmory. And again, it's just, sure, you can do enough damage that it wants to roost up again. And it has to roost up, by the way, because otherwise the Swampert is more of a threat, because with Waterfall it can flinch it down. So it's good, it's smart from TBIC to be making sure to keep the Skarmory at full health. But for Vin, it's just, you're not breaking through it, and eventually the Skarmory can start hitting you, and you're just not getting anything out of that trade. You have to go hard Zapdos much earlier, but we see a few more turns of just Vin trying to force progress with the Glastrier, predicting a roost there, which doesn't happen, and the Skarmory is able to just keep Night Slashing it down. And the Zapdos is also good here because you could get the static on the Night Slash and paralyze. But that Night Slash to kill the Glastrier is also the thing with it, is that now your Skarmory isn't a Swampert answer anymore because it's one waterfall flinch off from just dying. Although equally, that's a Swampert that can't set Rain up anymore, so it's not as much of a threat as it could be. And after turns and turns and turns of that Glastrier not really doing anything against the Skarmory, now the Zapdos comes in, showing again, this could have just happened like 5 turns ago, and you would still have an intact Glastrier. But the Zapdos comes in, and it's going to miss the Thunder against the Boltund, which is unfortunate. Would have still done a lot, even though it's resisted, because Zapdos is powerful and Boltund is frail. And then that is going to try and Volt Switch out as the Swampert comes in. And I think the thinking from TBIC here with the Volt Switch is that even if Finn does go Swampert, he has outs against it. Tornadus can live a hit and outspeed. But he actually goes Skarmory on the Ice Punch, which I believe is predicting that Tornadus. And the turn after that, the Swampert would be free to just kill it, but we see an Earthquake come out. And what I think that is Vin expecting the Skarmory to be faster, so it would Roost, lose its flying typing, and then get smashed by the Earthquake. But that doesn't work out. As we hover over, Mega Swampert and Skarmory are both base 70 speed, but Skarmory's very rarely run speed investment, or at least maximum speed investment, on their EVs. And if you really want, you can calc the damage of the attacks you've already made against it to see if it's max HP and defense. And just, if you're not sure, then as I just did, you can hover over the Mons, see what the potential speed is. The point is that just, it feels like just a guess that the Skarmory would be faster, so you Earthquake. And it's a guess that you don't need to make because the information is there to turn that into an informed decision rather than a guess. But the Skarmory is able to roost back up, and now it can just keep roosting without a care in the world. Except it can't, because it gets flinched, and then it's just gonna go down. And at this point, even with the Skarmory going down, it's still advantage to Bic, just because he can... The Zapdos is never making any progress whilst the Goodra exists, and the Swampert can just be outspared and threatened by this Tornadus, which can also hard switch into it, living even an Ice Punch. So it's going to be very difficult for Vin to force progress when the Swampert Zapdos without their Rain are just walled. And so at this point, all Vin can really do is try and position the Z-Celebrate Meloetta to win. And so from a TBIC perspective, you just need to be making sure that you don't give the Meloetta that chance to set up by having something weakened or crippled in against it, or in a situation where the Meloetta could come in. And when it comes in, you want to have the Tornadus or the Boltund already in on it so that they can outspeed and get an attack off before the Meloetta goes for the Z-Celebrate and raises its defenses, meaning that future attacks aren't going to do as much. And now the Tornadus is going to just Grass Knot and kill the Swampert. And leaving the Swampert in there is another move that I don't like. And the reasons for that are that the Tornadus coming in like that does immediately imply the Grass Knot, and it just makes sense to bring Grass Knot as prep against a team that you know is going to have a Mega Swampert on it. But even if it doesn't, then you take the Hurricane, you Ice Punch the Tornadus, do like 60-70%, he just switches out and regenerates it back off, whereas you're never getting that HP back. And so staying in against a full health Tornadus with a Mega Swampert that isn't in the rain isn't ever really a good idea unless you're just sacking it. And when you have a Zapdos that you can go into, it's even, i.e. a thing that happily switches into Tornadus, it's even less of a good idea. And the other thing about Zapdos is that Grass Knot, despite being a special move, makes physical contact, meaning that you'd have a chance of proccing the static on the Tornadus, which would make Meloetta setting up much easier since you'd outspeed it. But the Swampert goes down, and now the Zapdos comes in. And we're kind of seeing throughout the game with the Tornadus and with the Skarmory, we've seen Mons get thrown out or allowed to be worn down, and only after they go down, the Zapdos coming in. So we see Goodra on the Zapdos, again, fairly standard stuff, but at that point, there isn't really anything that Vin can do about it, because even if you were to expect the Goodra, what does he do? Like, you Hurricane and you do 36 instead of 18, sure, whatever. And Meloetta makes no sense because you're not breaking it with a special set. And so now Vin just Hurricanes, and all he can really do is fish for the confusion and try and hacks the Goodra down. The Goodra is going to go for the Rain Dance, meaning that it wants to rest and heal up and just try and stall the Zapdos out, which is fair enough. Hurricane does confuse the Goodra, and TBIC would have been very sad if it hit itself, but it's able to get the rest off and hydrate back up. And so now we have a couple of turns of just this. Draco Meteor doesn't do very much, and the Zapdos is going to roost back up. So now the Goodra is going to have to just Rain Boosted Aqua Tail for a chance at getting damage. And at that point, you just need to see this game out as TBIC. You're very much at the advantage. And it is easy to kind of get a little bit complacent in these kinds of situations. But what you need to be thinking is, what is there that can happen that will allow my opponent back into the game here? And already, your special attack is cut from having Draco Meteored. And so that's already a weakness that can be exploited and set up on. And with a turn of Rain left, the Aqua Tails aren't going to be Rain boosted anymore. They're not stabbed. They're not going to be very powerful, which is also going to lend itself to the Meloetta being able to set itself up. Another thing is that with one turn of Rain left, with how the interaction works with timings with hydration, if you attack into the Zapdos and get staticked, then you're not going to be able to heal it off with the hydration. And then you will suddenly have a Goodra that is paralyzed and has cut special attack. And that's exploitable, because if the Zapdos roosts up and stays in, then you have to break through paralysis twice. You have to break through paralysis to set your Rain back up. You have to break through it again to rest to heal up. And through all of that, there's also the chance of getting confused and hitting yourself from the Hurricane and getting hacks down in that kind of way. So with the Rain about to end, you really don't want to be risking the static. So the Zapdos just goes for a Suicide Hurricane, and we see the Aqua Tail get the static. And now the Meloetta is going to come in, and it is unlucky for TBIC to get paralyzed by the static there. Like, absolutely, that is very unlucky. But the thing with it is that ideally you want to be positioning yourself in such a way that there isn't even the risk of things like this happening. You're just guaranteed to win. But in this case, TBIC didn't do that. He put himself at risk of this situation happening when he could have rested up, hydrated off, Rain Danced again, kept on playing that game. And now we're going to see that he has to switch because he's paralyzed and cut special attack into the Tornadoes. on the Z Celebrate. He misses a Hurricane, which, yeah, unlucky, and dies to the Thunderbolt. Camerupt is going to come in, take a lot from the Psychic. Fire Blast does a bit, and it's going to die. Now Bolton comes in, which is still faster, and it misses the Hyper Beam. Goes down to the Psychic. Then the Gudra is going to come in and also die to the Psychic. So that's 2 moves missing, which, again, it's unlucky, but ideally you put yourself in a situation where you don't have to rely on that in order to win. And as well as that, the chance of the Hyper Beam, the Fire Blast, which could have missed, and the Hurricane all hitting is only like 53%. And so there's quite a few things that we've seen in this game. From the start, it's just being careful with things like a Disguise on a Mimikyu and just sort of considering how good of a trade is this? What am I getting out of it? Then there's the kind of idea of when you're getting damage on something, just how important is the damage that I'm getting compared to what I'm risking happening? Like, is it important to get this 40% on the Skarmory at the expense of my Glastrier? Especially when you have the Zapdos that can come in and roost off any damage that it would take. And then at the end, from TBIC, just when you're in the kind of controlling position, is just seeing the game out. And I think it's the kind of game that it's very easy to go, oh, I got hacked. Oh, Vin hacked me. He got lucky. Which is true. But from a perspective of improvement as a player, and for clarity, I'm not accusing TBIC of doing this because he didn't do this. I'm just saying that generally that kind of thing is very easy to say. But from a perspective of improvement and learning, you want to be going, what could I have done to ensure that I didn't have to risk that to begin with? And in this type of situation, there was something that you could have done to avoid that, which was seeing that risking the static as the rain ends puts you in that risky position, and just noticing that and going, okay, well, yeah, I'm still likely to win, but I'm guaranteed to win, if more slowly, if I do this. So I'm going to be patient. I'm going to act in such a way that I don't even have to risk getting staticked, getting fully paralyzed, and then landing 3 inaccurate moves to win. And so with that, that's the game. Well done, Meloetta. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with some more games. Goodbye.